The telegram had cost her 40 cents and 2 days of deliberation. Nora Callahan folded the reply slip and set it on the corner of the kitchen table where her late husband used to stack his tallies. She did not look at it again. The decision was made. She had written to the employment office in Billings, Montana, stated that she needed a cook for the coming winter season, and offered $8 a month, which was every dollar she could spare, without selling the dry goods she had laid in for January. The ranch was not large. 40 acres, a timber frame house, a barn that needed one new wall, and a creek that ran clean even in August. It had belonged to the man she married at 19 and buried at 28. She had stayed. People in Larkspur Crossing had not expected her to stay. Some had told her plainly that a woman alone with no children and no family within 300 miles had no business holding on to land. Nora had thanked them and stayed anyway. She was 31 now. The root cellar was full. The fence line on the north pasture was sound. She had not asked anyone for a single thing in 3 years. But winter in this part of Montana ran from October through April, and she could not work the land and cook 3 meals a day and chop wood and keep records and patch the barn roof before the snows came. She had tried the year before and ended January with a fever that put her in bed for 2 weeks. She would not end this January that way. The employment office in Billings wrote back that they had one candidate, a man named Calvin Marsh. Age 34. Cook by trade. Formerly of a cattle camp outside Miles City, and before that a ranch kitchen in Colorado. His references were attached on a separate sheet. 2 of the 3 references spoke of his biscuits specifically. She had written back and confirmed the hire. That had been 6 weeks ago. Now it was the 4th morning of October, and the stage from Billings was due at Larkspur Crossing before noon. The stage was 40 minutes late. Nora stood at the edge of the freight yard with her wagon and her bay horse watching the road north. Around her, the small business of the town moved through its ordinary Tuesday. The mercantile owner, Douglas Fenn, swept his step. The blacksmith rang his hammer in a slow, steady rhythm. 3 women from the church auxiliary crossed the street together, and 2 of them looked at Nora the way women sometimes looked at her, with a mixture of pity and unease, as though her particular kind of alone was something that might be catching. She looked back at the road north. The stage came over the low rise at 11:30, trailing its customary column of yellow dust. It slowed into the freight yard, and the driver set the brake with a sound like a short bark. 4 passengers stepped down. A minister, judging by his collar. An older couple, both stout, who were met immediately by a young man with a farm wagon. And then the 4th. He was tall, dark coat, trail dusty. A canvas bag over one shoulder and a flour sack tied at the top hung from his other hand. He wore his hat pushed back, and he scanned the yard with a look that was not quite uncertain but was also not yet settled. Brown eyes. A jaw that had not seen a razor in perhaps 4 days. He looked like a man in the middle of making a decision he had not fully announced to himself yet. Then she saw what he held against his left side. A baby. Not a large baby. Not one that could sit up or hold its own head with full confidence. An infant, perhaps 3 or 4 months old, wrapped in a piece of blanket that had once been blue. The baby was awake. It looked at the freight yard with the remote, serious expression that very young babies sometimes wore, as though they were watching something the rest of the world could not see. The man spotted Nora. He walked toward her. Calvin Marsh. Nora waited. He stopped 2 paces away and shifted the flour sack to his other hand. "I am Calvin Marsh. I am very sorry, Miss Callahan." She looked at the baby. The baby looked at the freight yard. That was not in the advertisement. No, it was not. He did not look away. I understand if you want to put me back on the stage. The office in Billings does not know. I will send word when I reach the next town, and they can find you another candidate before the month is out." She studied him. His voice was steady. His eyes were not begging. That steadiness told her something she did not yet have words for. "What is the name of the child?" "Clara. Where is the mother?" He was quiet for a moment. "Gone. She left the baby at the camp in August with a note that had my name on it. I do not know if she was right about that." But no one else claimed her. Nora looked at the baby again. Clara looked back at her with those large, still eyes. "Do you know how to care for an infant? I have learned a great deal in the past 2 months. Not all of it easily. There was no self-pity in that, just fact." Nora picked up the rein and turned toward the wagon. "Get in, Miss Marsh." She did not speak much on the drive back. He did not fill the silence unnecessarily, which she noted. He held the baby against his chest with the easy, practiced steadiness of someone who had made that adjustment out of necessity. Clara slept before they were a mile out of town. He looked at the land as they rode, the brown hills folding east, the first aspens turning yellow on the high ground to the west. He watched it the way a person watched something they were deciding whether to trust. She pulled the wagon through the gate and around to the back of the house. She showed him the kitchen first. It was a good kitchen. She knew it was a good kitchen. Solid stove, iron, 4 burners. A full shelf of dried goods. Her knives were sharp, and she kept them that way. He stood in the doorway for a moment, and something in his posture shifted in a way that was very small, but visible to someone paying attention. His shoulders settled. This is a real kitchen. She stepped past him to the shelf. "I know it." He crossed to the stove, touched the iron with the backs of his fingers to gauge its temperature, opened the firebox, and looked in, checked the damper. Then he went to the shelf and read her stores without touching anything. "I can work with this." She showed him the room off the kitchen. Small, with a single cot and a window that looked west. Where Clara would sleep was a thing she had not prepared for, and she said so plainly. "I will manage." He looked at the cot and then at the room with the measuring eye of someone already solving a problem. "I have been managing." She left him to it. He made supper that first evening without asking her what she wanted. She came in from the barn at 6 and found the kitchen warm and the smell of something slow and good hanging in the air. He had found her dried beans and her smoked side meat and made a pot of something that was closer to a proper stew than anything she had produced in the last 3 years. Clara was in the flour sack, tied with a length of rope into a kind of sling across his chest. She slept through his chopping and stirring with the self-assurance of a creature who had decided she was safe. He set a bowl in front of Nora and one across from it for himself. She ate and said nothing until the bowl was half empty. "It is good." He nodded. He ate. She set her spoon down for a moment. There is a wooden spoon on the hook by the window. The handle is cracked, but it holds. I would like you to use it for stirring rather than the metal one. The pot has a soft bottom. He looked at the hook, looked at it. He reached over and moved it to the peg directly above the stove, within reach. She looked at it. Yes, that was all. They finished eating. He washed the dishes. She did her tallies at the corner of the table. She had expected to feel her house invaded. She did not feel that. She felt something more like the way a room felt when a window was opened that had been shut a long time. She did not examine that too closely. The first week was practical. That was the right word for it. He learned her house, where she kept things and why, what she needed to have done before she came in from outside work. He did not ask her to explain her routines. He watched for 3 days and then he knew them. Bread on Monday and Thursday. The stove banked before dark. Coffee ready before 6. He was not a man who moved loudly through a space. She noticed that she no longer braced herself walking through her own kitchen door. Clara grew easier too, or perhaps Nora grew easier around Clara. The baby spent her days in the sling or in a drawer that he had padded and set near the stove for warmth. She was not a fussy baby. She watched everything with those serious eyes, and she reached her hands toward anything that interested her, which by the end of the first week included anything he set within her reach. He let her grip it. He was careful with her. But he was not soft in an anxious way. He treated her the way a steady person treats something fragile, with attention and without panic. On the 5th day, Nora came in at noon and found him teaching Clara to track a moving finger. He did not stop when Nora entered. He finished, and then he served her the midday meal. She has good eyes. He looked at the baby. Yes, she sees things clearly. He said it plain. But she had the feeling he was not entirely talking about the baby. Douglas Fenn came by on the 8th day. He did not come for any necessary reason. He came because Larkspur Crossing was a small town, and a woman alone hiring a man from Billings was the kind of thing people in small towns felt entitled to inspect. Fenn tied his horse at the post and came around to the kitchen door, which was the custom here. Nora was in the yard when he arrived, mending the gate latch on the chicken run. I heard you brought someone in from Billings. I hired a cook. She did not stop working. A man, I heard. Yes, Fenn shifted his weight. He was not a bad man exactly. He was a man who had decided that the proper order of things was something he had a personal stake in protecting, which was a different thing entirely. I thought perhaps you would have done better with a girl from town. The Sutter girl is looking for work, and she is a decent hand in a kitchen. Nora set the latch. Tested it. The gate swung clean. The Sutter girl is 17. She set down her tools and faced him. I hired a cook with 10 years of experience. That is what I needed, and that is what I obtained. Fenn looked toward the kitchen window. He came with a child, I heard. News traveled its usual speed here. He did. She picked up her tools and moved toward the barn. Anything else, Douglas? He had more he wanted to say. She could see it in the way his jaw worked, but he looked at her face and thought better of it. Just wanted to see you were managing all right. I always manage all right. Thank you for coming. He left. She went inside. Calvin was at the stove. He had heard. The walls of this house were not thick, and Fenn had not been quiet. He did not say anything. She did not offer reassurance. She sat down at the table with the account ledger. There is a second latch on the barnside door that needs looking at before it rains. She opened the ledger. When you have a moment. I will look at it this afternoon. That was the whole of it. By the 3rd week, she knew things about him that he had not told her directly. He had cooked professionally since he was 20, starting in a cattle camp in Colorado and working his way through a series of outfit kitchens over the years. He was precise about quantities and patient about timing. He did not improvise carelessly. He knew his foundations well enough to work from them. He read. She had a small shelf of books, mostly practical, a farming almanac, a medical reference, 2 novels someone had left behind in the house years ago. She came in one evening and found him at the table with one of the novels open, Clara asleep across his knees. She sat across from him and did her own reading. They did not speak for an hour. This was, she realized, the most comfortable she had been in an evening in 3 years. That knowledge sat in her chest with a weight that was not unpleasant, but was also not simple. In the 4th week, the first real cold came down from the north. Not the killing cold, not yet. but the kind that reminded a person in Montana that the killing cold was coming and that everything unprepared for it would suffer. The kind that made a woman think about the north pasture fence and the split wood pile and whether the chimney flashing was tight enough. She was in the barn before 5 that morning. He had coffee waiting on the back step by the time she came out. He was wrapped in his coat, Clara bundled against his chest in a way that left his hands free. She took the cup. The north wall of the barn. She looked at the corner she had been putting off. There is a gap where the board is sprung. I meant to get to it in September. I saw it. If you have spare boards and a hammer, I can take a look this morning while the bread is rising. She looked at him. You are hired as a cook. I am standing here. He glanced toward the barn. The bread will rise whether I watch it or not. She handed back the empty cup. The boards are in the lean to beside the door. He fixed the barn wall. He did not do it perfectly. He was a cook and not a carpenter, but he did it soundly, and soundly was what was needed. She came around at mid-morning and looked at the work and ran her hand along the new board to check the fit. Good enough. He was watching her check his work without any sign of embarrassment. My father was a carpenter. Not a master. But careful. She looked at the board again and then at the seam. You are careful too. She had not intended that to sound like anything more than an observation, but the way it landed in the cold air of the barnyard made it sound like something more. She turned and went back to the pasture work. She did not hear him follow, but she heard him let out a slow breath that the wind carried to her. October deepened. Fenn was not the only person in Larkspur Crossing with opinions about Calvin Marsh. The women from the church auxiliary sent one of their number, a Mrs. Ida Pierce, with a basket of things on a charitable pretext, and what she actually came to deliver was a very thorough examination of the situation. Ida Pierce was in her 60s. She had kind eyes and a sharp mind, and she used both deliberately. She came in through the kitchen door as was proper, introduced herself to Calvin with real courtesy, accepted a cup of coffee, held Clara for 10 minutes with the confidence of someone who had raised 6 children, and then sat down at the kitchen table and spoke her piece. People will talk. Ida set her cup down. They already are. Nora sat across from her. People in this town have been talking about me since I was 28 and did not sell the ranch. I have not died of it yet. Ida looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at Calvin, who was at the stove and had not moved from it. He seems like a decent man. He is. That came out more firmly than Nora meant. She did not soften it. Ida looked at Clara, who was back against Calvin, settled in the sling. The child has no mother. It was not a question. No, Calvin did not turn around. He said it to the stove, flat and without apology. Ida was quiet for a moment. Well, she rose and picked up her basket. I hope she finds one. She said her goodbyes with warmth and no fuss and left. Nora sat at the table. Calvin set a fresh cup of coffee in front of her and went back to the stove. Thank you. For the coffee, she meant. Or that was what she told herself she meant. The trouble came in the second week of November. His name was Garrett Voss, and he had ridden down from the high country with 3 men and a legal document that he claimed established his right to the northeastern corner of the pasture land Nora held, including the section where her winter creek ran. He tied his horse at the front post and came to the front door, which no one in Larkspur Crossing used, and that alone told her what kind of man he was. She answered it. Voss was about 50. Red-faced, well-fed, with the kind of ease that came from years of being right simply because he was the largest presence in any room. He wore a beaver felt hat and a coat with a fur collar. He held the document out to her like a man who had already won. I have a survey from 1879 that places that section under the Voss family land grant. Your husband bought this property in 1874. The grant predates his deed. She looked at the document. She did not take it. The deed my husband filed with the Territorial Land Office has never been challenged in 7 years. Voss smiled. Not the kind of smile that meant he was pleased with her, the kind that meant he had already decided what was going to happen. I am challenging it now. I expect you will find the legal fees are more than a woman in your situation can manage. It might be simpler for everyone if we settled this directly. I am willing to pay you for the inconvenience. She looked at him. What inconvenience? He named a sum. It was not a large sum. It was an insulting sum, and it was designed to be, because an insulting sum taken quietly would tell him exactly how frightened she was. Get off my land. He had not expected that. Mrs. Callahan, I am offering you a reasonable, I heard your offer. Nora stepped back and gripped the doorframe. I declined it. Now you are trespassing. I will give you to the count of 5 before I go inside and come back with my rifle. He looked at her for a long moment. He was not a man who had been spoken to this way by a woman, or possibly by anyone in some time. He was deciding whether she meant it. She meant it. He left. But he rode slowly, and he looked back twice, and both times his face wore the expression of a man who was not finished. She did not sleep well that night. She sat at the kitchen table with the deed box open and the papers spread in front of her, going through every document she and Thomas Callahan had filed with the land office in 1874. Calvin came downstairs at 2 a.m. with Clara. He stood in the kitchen doorway. She did not look up. I heard someone at the front door today. Garrett Voss. She moved a paper aside. He is claiming a portion of the northeast pasture on the strength of a land grant that predates the deed. He wants the section where the Winter Creek runs. He crossed to the stove and set water on for something hot. Clara was awake, watching the lamp. Is his claim sound? I do not know. The deed is clean, but a grant is a different instrument. She set a document down. If he has a court in Billings willing to hear it, the legal costs alone could break the ranch by spring. He knows that. It is what he is counting on. Calvin sat down at the other end of the table. He set Clara on the table surface and kept one hand on her, and she gripped his finger and looked at the lamp with great seriousness. Do you have the original survey that came with the deed? She sorted through the box. Yes, here. He turned it and read it in the lamplight. He was quiet for some time. Your husband filed a corrected survey in 1877. See the notation here. He pointed to a small mark in the lower corner. It references a boundary revision with the county recorder in Custer County. If that revision was recorded, it supersedes any grant that does not account for it. She had not known that notation was there. She had read this survey a dozen times. She had never seen it. She looked at it now. She looked at him. You can read a survey. My father surveyed as well as built. He taught me. She sat back in her chair. You read, you cook, you fix barn walls, you read surveys, and you raise infants. He looked at her for a moment. I have had a varied life. There was a dryness in it that was not quite a smile, but was the material a smile was made from. Nora looked at the survey again. Then she looked at Clara, who had fallen asleep on the table between them, still gripping his finger. She rode to Billings the following week. She left on a Monday and returned on a Wednesday, and when she came through her own kitchen door at 6 p.m, supper was on the stove, and Calvin was at the table with Clara, who was batting at a length of string he held above her. and the kitchen smelled like slow-cooked pork and sage and the particular warmth of a fire that has been kept right all day. She hung up her coat. The correction was recorded. She crossed to the table and set down her bag. August of 1877, Custer County Records. The Voss Grant does not include any territory revised after 1875. His claim has no footing. He looked up. That is settled then. That is settled. She sat down at the table. He set a bowl in front of her without being asked. Clara made a sound that was becoming, in its small and unrepeatable way, recognizable to Nora as approval. The baby looked at her with those large, still eyes. Nora looked back. She had been looked at by this baby many times over the past weeks. She had always looked away first. This time she did not. December came down hard and fast. The creek froze over on the 3rd, earlier than any year she could remember. The north pasture went under a foot of snow before the 8th. She and Calvin worked the days in 2 tracks, her outside and him in, and they crossed at meals and at the end of the afternoon and sometimes in between when she came in for coffee or he came out to help her with something the weather had made a 2-person job. They were efficient together. That was the word she kept reaching for and setting aside because it was not quite enough for what she meant. They moved around each other without collision. They anticipated what the other needed without either of them having decided to do that. She would come in cold and the coffee was hot. She would need the ledger and it would already be on the table. She did not know when this had happened. It had not been arranged. On the 15th of December, she came in from breaking the ice on the water trough to find him at the stove, and Clara in the open drawer near the warm base of the wall, and the old spoon on the floor where the baby had clearly reached it from the counter and flung it. He was making a soup with the last of the October venison and the dried herbs she kept in paper twists above the window. She picked up the wooden spoon and set it on the counter. He looked at it. Then at her. She has an arm on her. Nora looked at Clara. Clara was deeply satisfied with herself. She will be trouble. Yes, the word settled in the kitchen like something that had been waiting to be said. There was something in the way he said it. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her. He did not look away. She is fortunate, Nora said, to have someone who did not leave her behind. He was quiet for a moment. I could not do it. He looked at the baby in the drawer. She had my name on that note. Whether she was right or wrong, she had put the name of someone she thought would stay. And you stayed. He turned back to the stove. It is what I do. He stirred the soup with a long, slow motion. I stay where I am needed, and I do the work in front of me. She thought about that. She thought about a man who rode a stage into a strange town with a baby and a canvas bag and told the woman who was supposed to hire him that he would go back if she said so. No begging, no maneuvering, just the plain statement of his situation and the plain offer of her choice. She had kept him because he had not tried to manage her. She was still keeping him for the same reason. 3 days before Christmas, Ida Pierce came by again. This time with no pretense of a charitable basket. She came because she was a woman who said plainly what she meant when she had decided the time was right, and she had clearly decided. She sat at the kitchen table and watched Calvin serve the noon meal, and she watched Clara in her drawer, and she drank her coffee, and then she folded her hands on the table. I want to ask you both something. Nora looked up from the ledger. Calvin turned from the stove. This child has no name filed anywhere. Ida looked at Clara and then at Calvin. No baptismal record, no county record of birth. The woman who left her left nothing but a note, and a note is not a document. A child without a recorded name has no legal standing for anything. No inheritance. No right of care if something were to happen to you. She is as much a ghost as any child can be while still breathing." Calvin was still. "I know it. I am the clerk of records for this district." Ida said this without any irritation, as though it were simply the next fact. "Which many people forget because I am also on the church auxiliary. I can help you file a proper record of birth. The names on the record are the names of the people responsible for the child." She looked at Nora. Both people. The kitchen was quiet. The stove clicked and settled. Nora looked at the ledger. Then she looked at Calvin. He was not looking at the floor, and he was not looking at Ida. He was looking at Nora with the same steadiness he had looked at her with in the freight yard in October, when he had said she could put him back on the stage if she chose. Nora stood up from the table. "What do we need to bring to the county office?" Ida smiled. It was a very particular smile, the kind that belonged to a woman who had waited a long time to see something go right. "Just yourselves." They rode to the county seat on the 22nd of December. The ground was iron hard. The sky was the particular pale blue of a cold, clear day, with no mercy in it, only beauty. Clara was bundled into the warmest thing Nora had found, in the old cedar trunk in the spare room. A wool wrapping that had belonged to a baby she had thought about, but not spoken of in 3 years. She had taken it out and looked at it, and then she had wrapped Clara in it without making anything of it. Calvin had seen. He had not said anything. That was exactly right. The county office smelled of paper and pine resin. The clerk, a thin young man who looked barely old enough to hold a pen with authority, set the ledger open on the counter. Name of the child: Clara. Calvin looked at Nora. Clara Margaret. She did not know where Margaret had come from until she heard it leave her mouth. Her own grandmother. Dead these 20 years. Calvin looked at her. Clara Margaret Marsh. He turned back to the clerk. The clerk wrote it. He looked up. Father, Calvin Marsh. The clerk wrote. Mother, the kitchen in October. The freight yard. $8 and a stage from Billings, and a man who stood in a strange yard with a baby and told her she could send him back. Nora Marsh. It was the first time she had said it. It was the first time she had thought it, even as a word that belonged to her. She did not look sideways to see how he received it. She kept her eyes on the ledger, but she felt him standing beside her, and she felt the way he went still, and then the way he settled, and it was the same settling she had seen in his shoulders the first day he stood in the doorway of her kitchen and recognized a place he could work. The clerk wrote the name. He turned the ledger and pushed it across the counter. Signatures here and here. Calvin signed first. His handwriting was clean and unhurried. He passed the pen to Nora. She signed. The clerk blotted the ink and closed the ledger. That is the record. Congratulations, they drove home in the afternoon light. The pale blue sky had warmed toward gold by the time they turned through the gate. Clara slept the whole way, having decided that the county seat had been adequately experienced and that her energy was better conserved. Nora pulled the wagon around to the back. They sat for a moment without getting down. She had not planned anything she was about to say. She had not planned most of the important things that had happened in the last 11 weeks. I should tell you. She looked at the barn. That I did not intend any of this when I sent that telegram. He was quiet. I know it. Neither did I. The baby was the end of it, she thought you might say. He thought about that. The baby was the truth of it. He set the reins across his knee. She came with me, and you kept us both. There was no game in that. No calculation. You just looked at what was in front of you, and you decided. He looked at her. That is what I wanted to know about you. Not anything else, just that. She looked at the barn. The new board he had put in the north wall in October was slightly lighter than the old timber around it. It would weather and darken by spring. By next winter, it would be indistinguishable. I need to say something to you plainly. He waited. I have not been well built for trusting since Thomas died. I do not say that as a warning. I say it so that you know I am not arriving at this by accident or by loneliness or because it is winter and the options are limited. She looked at him. I am saying it because I have watched you every day for 11 weeks, and I have not once wished you were different. He looked back at her, those steady brown eyes. Nora, just her name. Nothing added to it. It was enough. It was, in fact, everything she had been owed for a very long time and had stopped expecting. Someone saying her name like it was the end of a thought they had been building toward all morning. Like arriving. January was cold and bright and full. She did not end it with a fever. She ended it at the kitchen table on a Sunday evening, tallying the winter accounts with the lamp between them and Clara on the braided rug on the floor, pushing herself across it with a kind of determined, exploratory crawl that she had discovered she could do and was very pleased about. Calvin watched her from the corner of his eye. He was reading. He reached down once when she crawled too close to the chair leg, redirected her gently, and went back to his book. Nora watched them both. She set down the pen. He looked up. The wooden spoon was on the hook above the stove, where she had asked him to put it on the first night and where it had stayed. It was the same cracked spoon it had always been. But the kitchen around it was different now. Not in its walls or its shelf or its stove, in the way it felt when she walked through the door. Like a room where someone knew her. Like a place that held more than one life. Like home had decided, after a long time of waiting, to mean what it was supposed to mean. She picked up the pen and went back to the accounts. Clara made a sound of great self-congratulation from the rug and continued her investigations. Outside, the Montana dark settled over the frozen creek and the sound past her fence and the barn with its one new board, and the cold was only cold. And the lamp burned steady. And they were warm.